Mike awoke on the couch as he had the night before. This time it was supposed to be more comfortable. He had actually laid out better bedding on the couch and changed into more appropriate sleepwear. He hadn't stayed awake too late, he slept well enough, but something was terribly wrong, and he knew it. As he rolled onto his back, he felt something like a pulse in his abdomen, followed by a strange sour feeling. He slid upwards on the couch as the pressure and pain spread further. It reminded him of how he felt after he bruised his abdomen in a motorcycle accident years ago, though only if the outside pain somehow managed to migrate underneath the skin and muscle. I knew there was something off about that pizza. It had an odd taste, but it was the slightly chalky consistency that had turned him off. He still ate most of the pizza without a hitch. Now he regretted it. It was worse than any hangover he could have possibly felt. Something was definitely wrong with that pizza. Suddenly an overwhelming clench hit his body, a wave of pain, and before he could even rationalize his actions, he was off the couch and into the bathroom. When Mike emerged a short while later, he was feeling even worse. He leaned against the doorframe and rubbed his damp face. At some point, he apparently started to sweat, even though he felt clammier than hot. I'm dying, he croaked out and looked back towards the living room. He couldn't go back to the couch. He felt too sick to suffer through laying on the couch. This was the first time he actually considered laying down in the master bedroom, and for a moment almost managed to mentally talk himself out of it. Then the pain started to slowly intensify, and he gave in. He unintentionally banged on the puppet's room before swinging in on the door in an almost drunken fashion. He was sure that it looked a lot worse than it was. The puppet was knelt near the foot of his bed, doing something half underneath it. The way it suddenly jolted upwards when he came in, completely interested in his presence, made him believe that it had heard him through the wall. He hoped when he had slammed the door on the way in and not the awfulness that followed. You don't care about me being in the back bedroom, right? It slightly tilted its head and seemed almost to shrug a shoulder. Maybe. Mike, meanwhile, was only there for a total of 7 seconds before turning to leave. All right, thanks. I'll be in there. He didn't even wait for a full answer. He just took the puppet's lack of offense as a good sign and hurried into the bedroom as fast as he possibly could. The bed was still made as he collapsed on top of it and just laid there on the comforter. It was already so much more comforting than the couch, and Mike almost felt a little better. That passed quickly, and he turned onto his side, clutching his middle as if it would relieve the mess occurring within him. The puppet appeared in the doorway shortly later. Mike didn't see him come in and seemed to, instead, feel him coming, almost like the feeling one would get if they thought they were being watched. Mike had become more used to it, and the animatronic enough that he had let his guard down. It wasn't like he had the strength to raise it again. I think, he tried to force out, pausing a moment before looking back to finish, that the pizza was a death sentence disguised as a lump of cheese and bread. He immediately regretted using the word death, but the animatronic didn't react to it. Instead, the puppet leaned over him and stared downwards at him. It scanned him, and seemed to be a bit concerned. As concerned as it could be with a big smile on its face. I'm fine. I just need to lie down for a while. I'm not actually dying or anything. That chiming laughter returned from the day before. The puppet then left and Mike rolled over onto his side yet again. Damn it, Sam. And never mind, Sam told me to throw it out, so it would be my fault. Damn it, Mike. He vacantly laid there as his mind seemed to continue talking. It wasn't like he had anything stimulating to do. He felt too ill to do anything more than just lie there and stare at the blank wall. Frederick didn't even have much of anything interesting to look on the walls except for a few pictures. Even they were pretty standard. Him with a baby, him with his oldest son, a wedding picture, and a small painting of a ship at sea. He zoned out staring at it and only returned to reality when the puppet started trying to slide the Foxy plush under his arm. Mike raised a brow and looked down at the doll now beside him. Huh, look who's back. The puppet was delighted at his willingness to take the toy, regardless if he was ill or not. He humored the animatronic by dragging the plush beside him. However, right afterwards he felt an acidity in his throat and forced himself to sit upwards against the pillows. To his relief, it faded away. As bad as he could still felt, he had managed to get that much under control. His mouth still tasted like a piece of rotting flesh from the inside of an animatronic suit. As soon as that thought passed his mind, the acid returned. It wasn't like he could get the thought out of his head either, just thinking of all those rotten bodies and the moldy pizzeria and the disgusting pizza that had been sitting in the freezer. A few seconds passed where Mike couldn't figure out whether he needed to sprint back to the bathroom or continue lying there unmoving. Finally, he slid back down into the pillows, closed his eyes, and evened out his breathing to get everything under control. It worked too well, and he faded out for a short time, rousing later to the feeling of his arm being shook. He half-heartedly glanced down at the black hand on his arm, then his vision was obscured with an offered pink cupcake. A wave of nausea struck as the sweet smell irritated his already suffering senses. By now he knew the puppet was unpredictable, so he wouldn't usually shove its hand back as though the cupcake was poison. No, I can't eat it. The puppet looked to the cupcake and to Mike, seemingly confused, but then followed by suddenly straightening. It held the cupcake close and took back into the hallway. With it gone, Mike rolled onto his side. If it comes back in here with that pizza... The thought cut off as he stared at the plush form of Foxy right beside him. He reached out and clutched it in his hand. Foxy, you have to help me, he mockingly begged the inanimate creature. My body's turning against me and I think I might be losing it. Naturally, Foxy did nothing, which was actually a relief. Mike didn't think he was well enough to deal with talking toys. It was hard enough that a life-size Jack-in-the-Box was trying to feed him. Speaking of which, the puppet must have crept behind him as it chimed attentively. Mike turned back full of dread and was relieved to see a glass of water instead of any other foodstuff. He accepted it thankfully, though did find himself studying it before daring to drink it. His mouth already tasted less stale. To his immediate annoyance, the phone started ringing the second he was chugging the water. He inwardly groaned at the thought of having to get up, go into the dining room, and then talk to some random person. Unless he didn't have to. Mike glanced to the puppet, which was now turned towards the door, staring down the hall. It had been relatively passive and helpful enough already without any indication that it was still angry about the day before. Could you grab that? The puppet obediently did so without even a hitch. It left the room and returned with the phone. Of course, by now the call had ended. Mike checked and could see that it was Sam who called, again, and exhaled. Sam's checking in on me again. He wasn't sure what the point of voicing his disturbance to the puppet was. And if I don't call him back, he's going to work himself up into something. He huffed a bit and dialed the number. It wouldn't have been a problem if he wasn't feeling like this. In fact, he would have been excited to see if he had found anything. Sam answered with a quick greeting. Hey, Mike, I was just about to call back. I found something. Yeah? Mike's voice sounded disinterested, and Sam was taken aback. Something up? He inquired. Mike quickly explained the situation. I think I got food poisoning. Hey, if you're not doing anything, maybe you could drive by and drop off some antacids. There was a pause on the line. You want me to go over there? Where you and... It can't hear me, can it? Mike rolled over again, feeling a swell of discomfort along with the slight burn of acid. I don't know. Just toss it in the window. It's in the back of the house. Hold on. And then Mike was gone. Too much water mixed with the lingering agony from the pizza. The phone sat untouched on the bed as the sound of Sam speaking could be heard. The puppet stared intensely at the phone as the low static started to grow in its chest, it hearing the other human on the line. It snapped out of its glare when Mike returned. He was swearing under his breath as he sat down on the bed. He felt a little better now, or he was able to sit upwards for a while to talk on the phone. I'm here, barely, he complained, his voice hoarse. Is this from those cupcakes you've been eating? Sam asked in disbelief. Before he could assume the worst, and Mike had to think about cupcakes, he broke in with a response. Remember that garbage I was supposed to toss out from the freezer? One of the pizzas still had a good date, so... You would have done it too. I know for a fact that you don't throw anything out. That's why you had me do it. Sam made a disgusted noise into the receiver. I wouldn't have done it, Mike. I hate to tell you, but those freezers were practically defective. They were going on and off all the time. Everything was spoiled. Why are you telling me this now after you know I've eaten the pizza? Mike groaned out and rubbed the sweat off his forehead. He was shocked that he was sweating with how dried out he felt. Spite, mostly because you're making me risk my life to go over there and give you antacids. If the puppet recognizes me, it's game over. Mike fought the urge to roll his eyes. Really, I appreciate it. I'll see you then. With the phone placed aside, he was able to collapse back on the bed. He's not coming in, but he's coming by. Just stay away from the windows and you don't have to see him. There was no movement or acknowledgement. Mike noticed and looked over to it, seeing it stand there beside the bed in its default pose. The default pose being what he labeled it when it would just stand there and watch him. It hadn't done this since it had been upset the day before. He took it as a sign. Something wrong? It didn't respond traditionally and instead just turns itself to look out the window. It then went completely still once more. Mike shrugged it off and laid back down. It took about 30 minutes until Sam could be heard in the driveway. Mike? Sam called out through the open window, standing underneath it. Mike, I meant what I said earlier. I'm not coming in. The former security guard dragged himself off the bed and to the window. You look awful. Are you sure you shouldn't be in an emergency room somewhere? I'm pretty close to being in a ditch somewhere. And if I don't get this under control, I don't know what I'm supposed to do about work. He couldn't sit in an office like this, even if the place he was guarding wasn't anything like the pizzeria. Sam frowned in disapproval and tossed the bottle up to him. Mike immediately twisted it open and retrieved a couple of pink tablets. So what did you find out? He asked as he popped them in his mouth. The chalkiness wasn't exactly easing him any, but he was holding out hope that it would somehow help. Are you sure this is a good idea? I mean, we could wait. Mike raised a brow. Nobody's going to hear anything or know what's going on. I'm not... Oh. He caught on to what he meant and glanced off to the side towards the other side of the room. Oh, he doesn't care. Don't worry about it. It was the puppet. That was what had Sam so afraid to linger or risk saying anything that would possibly trigger it, which Mike doubted as it never went outside. In a way, Mike understood. In a way, Mike didn't want to know what the animatronic used to do, as he only just got to the point of feeling comfortable around it. The puppet, meanwhile, stared with an empty smile. All of its previously helpful behavior was hidden as it eyed him. If it spontaneously forgot who he was and began treating him like a stranger, he wouldn't be able to tell the difference. I got a tape you need to listen to. Not on me, back at the warehouse, where the phone guy talks about how to put on the suits. I had to have gone through that entire box, and it was the only tape saying anything about it. That guy could talk a lot, but a lot of it was unimportant. I got maybe one sentence of actual information and then a couple of minutes of stuttering. I've never heard a guy be this much of a talker and still have practically no communication skills. Why are you looking at me like that? No reason. Mike took a small swig of the water, hesitating in setting it down as a soft static noise started to fill the room. He already knew it was the puppet and looked back. It hadn't moved from its position. I'll play it over the phone later. That way you won't have to come by, Sam offered and took a step back. I'm gonna take off now. Mike was planning to stop him, but the puppet was growing louder, so he instead let the other go. Thanks again, he finished and shut the window, and looked back to the puppet. He's gone now. Better? Mike asked, but then immediately noticed how unsteady he was. He sat back down on the bed, then collapsed on it. The static noise stopped and was abruptly followed by a loud slam. Mike shot upwards on the bed. What in the hell? His head shot to the side to see the puppet standing beside the window, which was now slammed shut. It smiled with a slight tinge of a glare around its eyes. Mike didn't even ask and simply dropped back onto the bed on the spot. He rubbed over his face and tried to ignore the powdery taste still in his mouth. I'm going to try and sleep this off. The next thing Mike knew, he was waking up in bed. His mouth tasted even worse, but his stomach was finally starting to feel a little better. He released the Foxy plush, which he had started grappling in his sleep, and sat upwards to look around the room. The puppet was missing. His curiosity piked some, and he dragged himself out of the bed. He staggered down the hall, his body stiff and sore from the prolonged sleep. It might have been the grogginess, but he was starting to become worried about the puppet's behavior. It probably wasn't that smart of him to bring Sam into the picture. The puppet was clearly not trusting of humans. He knew this by the violent reaction towards him when he had first appeared. Earlier he had been so focused on his own sickness that he didn't realize how dangerous it really was. The puppet could have lashed out at him like it did to Mike himself only a few days earlier. Then the damage would be done. Someone could see, Sam could get hurt, and it would be a disaster that could have only been avoided if he had just thought it through. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, so Mike let himself in. Hey. It was at that moment that he realized he actually didn't have a name for the puppet. He pushed it aside for the moment. The puppet was knelt beside its box with a slew of its plush toys sitting around it. It was holding one of the Freddys and a Chica, and its head snapped slightly upwards as its gaze fell on the human, surprised by his sudden appearance. It almost looked like he had gotten caught doing something wrong. Mind if I come in? It moved its head down like a partial nod and started to fidget with the plush toys. Mike shuffled over and sat down on the bed. The puppet moved uncomfortably and seemed both unwilling to touch the toys and yet unable to leave them be. It hit Mike that he had walked in on the puppet, the animatronic that would have willingly attacked someone earlier, playing with the plush animals. Oh, that's cute. He wasn't sure if the mental comment was sarcastic or not, but the scene was just a small bit endearing. If anything, it brought a smile out of Mike. I'm not used to living with another person. Usually I just do my own thing and don't sweat the details. The puppet looked over in interest. Mike reacted by looking down at the floor. And this is the second time I did that. First was a mix-up with me leaving, and now is this thing with Sam. I brought a guy in who's a stranger to you and to what is your house. It's not mine, no matter what the papers say. So I botched that too. It's not the stupidest decision I've made. Not even the worst one this week, considering I ate the pizza. There was a familiar soft chiming, and the puppet trembled a small bit. The puppet was laughing. Mike felt his body relax at the complete absence of anger. I'm gonna get better at this one of these days. And it hit him like a ton of bricks that one of these days wasn't too far out of the picture. He was living with it now, accommodating it as it did so for him, and unless there was a massive change in the near future, there was a good chance that he was going to be spending a lot of his time here. Almost like being a night guard, except watching a single animatronic constantly. He didn't really know how he felt. There was alarm from the idea, but Mike didn't feel positively or negatively about it. It didn't help that the puppet was being so passive with him, or that it had wept in front of him, or that he had walked in on it with a bunch of plush toys. Regardless of what happened earlier with Sam, Mike didn't feel ill will. I don't trust a lot of people myself. Never had. You just put up a guard to keep from getting screwed over by people, and usually it doesn't work. But I do trust Sam. He's never done me wrong. If it's any consolation, I wouldn't have just told anyone I needed help. Now the puppet looked downwards. There was still a disinterest and coldness towards Sam, and the puppet evidently didn't want to deal with him. Mike decided to let it drop. This was good enough for now. Foxy's still back in the bedroom if you want him. He reached down and lifted one of the Chicas, noticing that it was different from the normal one. I didn't get to see these the other day when you were pulling him out. The puppet then rose to full height and approached the box again, silently retrieving something before turning back with the same smile. Mike had to fight off the look of horror that tried to emerge on his face. The Golden Freddy plush had returned with a vengeance, looking more possibly poisonous than even the pizza did. The nausea that still lingered didn't help the fact that the animatronic was coming at him with it. Just seeing it up close made it so much worse. He could only imagine the brown stain on its belly being old, dried blood. Death by Fredbear. Never thought I was going out this way. He tried to hide his discomfort and took the plush into his hands. The puppet patted the toy on the head like it was alive, affectionately doting on it before literally putting it into Mike's hands. Maybe it's an animatronic thing. Maybe it thinks it's alive too. But I never saw Freddy stuffing suits full of teddy bears. Looking closer, he noticed something else. This is probably the one from the picture. If there's no other ones floating around and Fredbear was taken down, maybe this is the last one. He had a possible new lead literally dropped into his lap, but decided to ignore it for the moment. This was enough of a recovery for now. Sam dropped a stack of files onto the desk in frustration. Nothing. There was nothing here. As much as Sam was willing to try and ignore the past, Mike's search into the history of the pizzeria had gotten himself enticed as well. Unfortunately, all he could find was a single tape on spring-lock suits and absolutely nothing else. He was just about to give in and call it a night when his phone rang. He reached to it and answered without hesitation. Hello? There was a pause on the other line. Hello? Wrong number? Then a voice cut through. Sam. Mike? Sam blinked in confusion. Hey, I didn't expect you to call me. How are you feeling? Mike sounded a little tired, or like his voice was hoarse, but he spoke without a hitch. Doing a lot better. I think I'm past most of it. The way he trailed off was odd. Is something wrong? Sam pried. Mike hesitated before speaking. Sam, something happened earlier. I can't tell you much, but I think someone's watching us. They're watching us investigate. I know it sounds crazy, but someone was standing outside on the road earlier, staring at the house. The technician's body went cold. Oh no. Do you think he saw anything? Like, you know? No, I don't think so. He knows I'm here, whoever he is. But he didn't see you, and I don't think he saw Marionette either. Just... He exhaled in distress and went silent for a short while. Sam waited patiently until he continued. Here's the plan. You keep researching over there. I'll keep looking around here, and we'll just limit contact for a few days. If he sees you, he'll know you're involved, and we can't have that. No, we can't. Sam looked through the cameras at the dark warehouse. I won't come back by. Do I call you? Don't. He might track the calls or listen in on them. I'll call you in a few days once everything's quieted down. Don't call me until then, all right? The technician agreed without a hitch. All right. There's a short period of silence before Mike continued. I just know that if he sees us, we'll be in danger. You'll be in danger. And that's... I don't even know what we'd do then. Who even knows who he is or what he would do? Well, you always have the puppet, at least. I don't think it's just going to let some guy walk in and kill you, Sam said in a serious statement. But Mike laughed a little. Mike wasn't exactly one to laugh at anything, Sam said, so he was suspicious. Mike, is there something else going on? There was a shuffling against the phone before Mike blurted out, Hold on, the guy's back. I have to go. Remember, don't call until I call you. With that, he hung up, leaving Sam confused and concerned. He knew that something was wrong.